Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alison Keith, and I am the director of the Jackman Humanities Institute here at the University of Toronto. I am so very pleased to welcome you all to the public lecture of Professor Roy Sorensen, who joins us this week as the 2023-2024 Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Jackman Humanities Institute. Before we get going, I'd like to note a few housekeeping details. This lecture is being recorded, and I will offer introductory remarks and introduce our distinguished speaker. My colleague, Professor Kamari Clark, sitting to my right, one of our 12-month JHI Faculty Research Fellows this year, will moderate the Q&A after our speakers talk, and the Q&A will be followed by a reception. The bar is open before and after the lecture, but not while our distinguished speaker is speaking. One of the highlights of any year at the JHI is the week-long visit of our distinguished visiting fellow, and it's my great pleasure eventually to get to the introduction of Roy Sorensen. But first I'd like to start by introducing the Jackman Humanities Institute. The JHI is now in its 16th year of operation. It's the happy result of two very generous donations by the former University of Toronto Chancellor, the Honourable Henry N. R. Jackman. His donations were double matched by the university, creating an endowment to support research in the humanities and the humanistic social science disciplines at the University of Toronto. The JHI's mandate is to create new networks, both virtual and physical, for interaction in creative research and study that complement and go beyond the mandates of individual disciplines. By offering new ways to learn from one another, the JHI strives to enable new understandings of human experience. We advocate for the humanities in the international context as well, and it is in this connection that we bring a distinguished visiting fellow to the University of Toronto each year. Professor Sorensen has been working across all three U of T campuses this week with philosophers and students of the humanities, and at the JHI with the members of our circle of fellows, who are conducting research at every level, including undergraduate, doctoral, postdoctoral, faculty, and we even have an artist in residence with us. All of us working on some aspect of our annual theme of absence. Our conversations have broached many forms of absence. Absence as loss, abandonment, and omission. Absence as exile, separation, and unbelonging. And paradoxically, absence as boundless, infinite, and transcendent. In this context, I wish to acknowledge and to make present and visible the sacred land on which the University of Toronto operates. It's been the site of human activity for over 15,000 years. This land has been the territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Treaty People, Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, the Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe, or Anishinaabe, and allied nations to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. We are also mindful at the JHI of broken covenants and the need to strive to make right with all our relations. And speaking of our annual theme of absence, let me introduce this year's distinguished visiting fellow, who was absent for the first day of his week with us, but is now happily present, and who is indeed a brilliant match for our theme this year. Roy Sorensen is Professor of Philosophy at the University of Texas at Austin and Professorial Fellow in Philosophy at the University of St. Andrews. His philosophical interests encompass epistemology, metaphysics, and the philosophy of language. He's the author of A Brief History of the Paradox, Seeing Dark Things, The Philosophy of Shadows, and a cabinet of philosophical curiosities. And most recently, he is the author of a book entitled Nothing, A Philosophical History. In this most recent book, he explores how nothing can cause something. The absence of something might seem to indicate a null or a void, and emptiness as ineffectual as a shadow. But in fact, Professor Sorensen argues, nothing is one of the most powerful ideas the human mind has ever conceived. His book is a lively tour of the history and philosophy of nothing, explaining how various thinkers throughout history have conceived and grappled with the mysterious power of absence, and how these ideas about shadows, gaps, and holes have in turn played a very positive role in the development of some of humankind's most important ideas. Today, continuing in this vein, Professor Sorensen will tell us about photographing absent as an illustrated history. Please join me in welcoming Professor Roy Sorensen.
All right, that's the first photograph, according to how most people count it. What's interesting is, like, right from the beginning, you're seeing some shadows. When you're taking a photograph of your check, you'll notice they're pretty intrusive. They work themselves in right away when you're starting photography, and you're still struggling with them. They're very hardy. An absence, you might think, can't do anything, but an absence of light makes a difference to what is photographed. Here's the first thing. Philosophers like theses. You're going to argue for something. They rise immediately from the beginning of photography. They are coeval with the photographs of absences are coeval with the photographs of presences. Right. Why? The explanation is that the absences have effects. They are absences are causes. They can actually do things. So they're not just this hangers-on. They make a difference. They make a difference to the camera, regardless of your beliefs or your desires. They're pushy this way. Here's another photograph, early one by Daguerre, brought us the daguerreotype. Here you have a photograph in which, once again, you'll notice that there are shadows. It's a street scene, and this is actually a busy boulevard. I want to draw your attention to some other absences. There are holes. A hole is something that you can see. It's also something you can feel. So if you have a Lifesaver mint, you can sort of feel the hole. You can feel a hole in your pocket. Right? So they're both tactile. In case of shadows are absences of light. You can't feel them, but you can see them. They're only available to one sense. Holes, you can both see them and feel them. And they also make a difference. The change falls out of your pocket. Okay, so notice that we have other things that you can start seeing in these photographs. There are holes in the buildings. There are cracks in the walls. These are also very commonly present in a photograph. In the case of the shadows, because they're so closely associated with light, those will be particularly pervasive. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to show you that you can photograph absences. It may seem paradoxical that this can happen. You don't have to have, you might think, well, how can I photograph what is not there? An absence has a kind of interesting kind of status. It can be something that, depending on what it's absence of, it can make a causal difference. So when I'm saying that you can photograph absences, I'm not merely saying something that you can photograph them metaphorically. I'm saying literally you can photograph them. I'm a metaphysician, So I think I have photographic evidence of these absences. Other people, they're approaching them more artistically and so on. I'm there with an axe to grind. I'm trying to show my absences. I think that I can also see them, I can feel them. In the case of silence, for instance, I think that you can hear a silence. You don't smell the silence. You don't taste the silence. You hear the silence. It's also a kind of interesting experience. Right? All right, so there's a kind of principle here of subject neutrality. So suppose you're not sure of what you photographed. Maybe it's a shadow, maybe it's just an oil slick. Your uncertainty as to whether you have photographed something positive, this oil slick, or something negative, just a shadow, does not generate a doubt that you photographed something. So that suggests that we don't really use the principle that you can only photograph presences when we're trying to make a judgment as to whether something has been photographed. We presuppose that something has been photographed, even if it turned out to be an absence. When I'm looking at photographs of absences, incidentally, I'm sometimes uncertain what's going on. There's quite a bit of phenomenon that can lead to something dark in the picture. It sometimes is a shadow. Sometimes it's just something that's a dark object. In other cases, it's a physical phenomenon that's you have to go, you have to remember your physics to talk about. Maybe it's a diffraction phenomenon. It could be other. At first glance, you're apt to think that you are seeing shadows, and it's not really clear that on second thought you are. When you look in the mirror, at first you think, in addition to the ordinary things I'm seeing in the scene, I'm also seeing shadows reflected in the mirror. But then you're thinking, well, wait a minute. If it's a reflection, there ought to be some light. There's no light that's reflected off the shadow. So I don't actually think there are reflections of shadows. There's something similar. We could call it a para-reflection. So I have to kind of go through these photographs and what's going on in the photograph. And what's going on doesn't depend on my beliefs about it. Other people do think that your beliefs are really important. Jean-Paul Sartre thought your beliefs are really important. He thought you can see so he was late to a meeting with his friend Pierre at a cafe. And so he's tardy, he shows up, and then he looks at the scene, and there's the absence of Pierre just sort of pops out. And Sartre explains he's seeing the absence of Pierre because he expected Pierre. He doesn't see the absence of the Duke of Wellington because he didn't expect the Duke of Wellington. What Sartre's trying to do there is to avoid a proliferation of absences. So he thinks that you can perceive the absences, but it isn't that the world is like at every sort of a riot of absences. That's not what he's saying. They are creatures of human expectation. So I'm contrasting myself with Sartre this way. I think Sartre has a pretty attractive picture that way. Okay, so here's an illustration of uncertainty about what one's seeing. This is the people were trying to take a picture of a total eclipse. There were a number of efforts. This seems to be the first successful effort to get a photograph of. There's some controversy when they start, but notice the year, it's 1851. Right? So you wonder, well, does Sorensen count that as a shadow? Many people do count as a shadow, whereas Sorensen thinks it's a silhouette. And he, I'm treating silhouettes differently from shadows. A silhouette is actually the back surface of an object, according to me. So this is controversial theory. I'm just illustrating why there could be uncertainty. So when you're seeing something that's silhouetted, the idea is that the back of the object is blocking the light, and what you're seeing is, in these circumstances, in these backlit circumstances, is a surface of the object. In this case, when it's backlit, you're seeing the back of the object. This is controversial. I'll talk about this controversial claim. I'm not trying to persuade you I'm correct right here. I'm just saying that here we have a case where people would debate whether it's a shadow or not. I would be saying, oh, it's not a shadow. It's this other surprising thing. It's this object. The object is a bowl-shaped object that is, it's like, half of a ball or something. You're looking into this concave surface. Okay. So, and if I'm right, it makes so I'm acknowledging this is a contested case. Here I'm summarizing just what it is. An absorption layer is just the thing that makes the physical difference. So right now you're seeing my surface, my front surface. That's the normal way in frontlit circumstances. But if I was backlit, you wouldn't see the front. You would be seeing the back of me. Okay. But notice it would make an historical difference here. That this would be the first photograph of the far side of the moon. Right. Most people, even after they hear my words of wisdom on this topic, even Americans, right, who are kind of slow to give credit to the Soviets, they still think that was the first one. When you had a spacecraft and it got on the other side and it took a photograph of the surface as illuminated by the sun. That is the first frontlit photograph of the backside of the moon. Okay. So people So initially what people are doing is trying to avoid shadows, but then they do become interested in taking as their subject, their deliberate subject, the photograph of a shadow. In particular, the astronomers, when they want a photograph of a lunar eclipse, where the shadow of the Earth is being cast on the moon, what they want is the photograph of a shadow. And so they do photograph them. When I was trying to get this, a good example, which I could not, because Google is pretty good at searching for things incidentally, but it seems to just keep on ignoring the difference between a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse. And then it starts to spit out these things that I had not seen before. So there's a physicist claiming that he's photographed the shadow of a single atom. And that's what was put up there. I'm not sure this is correct. I have it could be other kinds of phenomenon or something. So I don't know whether that's a shadow or not. I'm thinking, for often physicists are kind of sloppy in how they use the word shadow. They'll talk about shadow tanks. That can't be what there's no, in a shadow tank where there's water rippling, and then you're supposed to look down at the bottom of the tank and you see the waves. But it's transparent water, so it's not a good candidate for being a shadow. So it's some sort of refraction phenomenon. The physicists themselves, they can fine-tune what they intend to be talking about once you start asking about it. When I talk about a shadow, what I mean is you have an object that blocks the light and then casts this, and that's the reason why you have that dark region. Okay. All right, so what I've been mostly pushing for is the reality of these shadows, but I want to acknowledge there are also illusions of absence. So there's this kind of apparent absence of traffic in this busy boulevard. But that is, that's a misleading appearance. The cameras at the time they need a long exposure to pick something up. So what's really going on is that there's an absence of representation of traffic rather than a representation of an absence of traffic. Philosophers love this. You just switch the point at which you put the word not in something. They like this. I like this. So the idea is, so I'm just repeating the photograph, and the idea is that what it's a representation of depends on what's the sensitivity of the camera. It's not representing the road as being free of traffic. If you have higher speed photography, you do get that representation. For example, a contemporary camera during COVID, that was a frequent theme. That is a representation of an absence of traffic. So what we now have is like these, so I've moved from a very low primitive kind of absence. I got shadows at the bottom. What I'm trying to do is like, there's the kind of the bottom realm of the absences. Shadows, holes, cracks. And now I'm moving on up, trying to get more absences to be visible. And then in looking through the photography, it looks like, well, pretty early on, we can have raised this question of whether there can be an absence of traffic, which would be a high level absence. Okay. Now, people were recognizing there's representations of absence. The photographers themselves understood what was going on. They were understanding the scope and limits of photography, and they were understanding it more quickly than other people. They had a cognitive advantage. Some of them exploited it. So one of the things that you would do is you would edit out the absences of people. So the Civil War photographer, Matthew Brady, he aimed to document the Civil War with photographs. It was a revolutionary enterprise. And so he was trying to improve on history, but nevertheless, he has to deal with Northern generals. So amazingly, what they do is they seem to be permitting him to take scenes of battles, the aftermath of battle, these horrific photographs. And they did not stop him. And he was on good terms enough, I guess, with them. So, but here's a photograph. Sherman and his generals. This is the original version. Someone was late, so the man over here was inserted. So that's the original, and then a grateful general has got himself in this group. And you can see what you're trying to do there is, it would be misleading. Like, so that there would be like these quarrels amongst the generals and the staff of who's in favor and who is not. And so if you were left out, that'd be pretty significant. So this fellow was accommodated. So here you have this representation of this is a representation of absence, and now what we want to do is get rid of it and distort the picture so it's we get rid of the absence. The absence of that general wants to be there, and it's in there. But then what we do is we doctor the photograph, and we get rid of the absence. Okay. Then they go on, unfortunately, to exploit. There's quite a bit of grief back then, and people, they're not sure what was going on with this technology. This amazing thing, electricity, is very counterintuitive. There's quite a bit of spiritualist belief, and people think, well, maybe you really can photograph the dead, and all kinds of seances. It's a terrible situation because there's so many people unexpectedly dying, and they're not going through the regular funeral practices, which people don't get the normal level of closure, and leads to this unfortunate susceptibility to superstition. So William Mumbler was a spirit photographer, and Mumbler was also quite good technically. He's the author of important patents. He was able to get images to print on newspapers, for instance. So he's technically good. But he also went into this business of spirit photography and attracted the attention of the grieving First Lady. And there's a famous picture, a Mumbler picture. There's Lincoln. Okay, so doctored photographs. So another thing too, incidentally, this is perhaps the more familiar thing. You have to remove presences with your photography. There would be people who fall out of favor, and so pretty early on, you want to make adjustments. So here's an important meeting. There's Lenin. There's other important people in there. Right after that photograph is taken, those people are arrested, and the arrest is so. This fellow right here would help. His mom would help hide Lenin and so on. He's like a pretty helpful mom, and but once some time in prison and so forth, your enthusiasm for the revolution dissipates, and so he no longer wanted to do that. He just wanted to be a regular person. That was thought inappropriate, and so he got his revolutionary enthusiasm was questioned. So out he went. He also, went to prison and was mistreated, and so it was like not a gentle. Later on, incidentally, that photograph he got revived. So they just were okay. So you kind of have the ins and the outs. There's quite a bit of this in the Soviets. Often it's discrete. Who is fallen out with Stalin, but sometimes it is not. There's a tradition in Russia of scratching out people. So you have a photograph and it's inappropriate, and you would scratch it out, and it was important that it was seen sort of scratched out, right? But other times it's just embarrassing that this person was associated earlier, that they had gotten the approval. Incidentally, favored people can also get removed. Just want to point equal time here. Goebbels, there was a rumor that he was having an affair with a prominent photographer, and they didn't want evidence in favor of that rumor. So this is the photograph that's alarming. There's our photographer, Triumph of the Will photographer. And so out goes Goebbels, right? Not because Goebbels is on the disfavored, but because we need to prevent this rumor from being supported. Okay, so what I'm trying to get here is, like, you might think that this is now starting to kind of damage my case here because I've got tampered photographs. This does raise this question, like, to what extent we have good evidence. So what I was trying to do is I'm trying to improve on perceptual evidence that there are shadows, absences, with photographic evidence in the way we do for many phenomena. I'm claiming photographs improve my case. And early on in the history, people they're very impressed by the objectivity of photography. And then in contemporary times, especially, where there's so much tampering, that this is thought now kind of naive. But I'm still one of the people who's very bullish on the value of photographic evidence. I've been photographed all over the place. The police are too. Yeah, just I photographed. You walk out the street, and I think they're correct. There's very good evidence, and superior to testimony, and superior to people's perceptual reports. All right, so I'm still kind of old school on that. So tampered photographs show that you need to interpret some of them with vigilance. Not all of them. Most of them, no. But when you have special reasons to be worried about them, then you look at them with special care. Here's one photograph. After President Kennedy is assassinated, the police get Oswald and note that this is the same kind of rifle that was responsible for Kennedy's death. That's a Marxist newspaper or something like that. But they're really impressed with the rifle. And what Oswald did is he said it's a fake photograph. Oswald insists he is a patsy for a larger conspiracy. And the police are kind of skeptical about that. But then 2 days later, Oswald himself is assassinated, and leading people to think, well, we'll take a closer look at that photograph and see whether it's a genuine photograph. And when they do look at it, they start seeing, well, there's this kind of shadow under his nose. There's a shadow kind of going that way, though. So perhaps it's two different light sources, and it's a tampered photograph. There are other features of the photographs that excited interest. And so a conspiracy theorist in particular looked at this. And, I mean, I think it certainly is reasonable to start looking at the photograph carefully. And then when I was I taught at Dartmouth College for a while, and when I was there, forensic tools had improved in forensic photography. And so this is just a summary of why it's just, it's a backyard photograph, right? But now it's just, you've got to look at it very carefully. And so you're starting to look at the physics of light to see if this could work. Shadows are difficult for us to precisely predict. It's peculiar, incidentally. So your contact with shadows, your familiarity with shadows is just as much as with ordinary objects. But your folk physics is far superior to your knowledge of shadows. Indeed, there's a strong tendency in human beings to treat shadows as honorary objects. And thus it's kind of interesting that the shadow defies gravity. You can see this clearly in children. Children have all sorts of strange beliefs about them, even though the children's empirical evidence is this, they have just as much evidence of what shadows are doing as objects. There's one of these experiments incidentally with a child. You put a child in a room and you have a light source, and it's a bare room, and you tell the child, I want your shadow to be projected around the room. And you can manipulate things as you wish, but that is your task. So what the children do is this. The light's on, and they go. So their picture is that it's projecting out of their body. Right? Despite many false predictions, we don't learn very much about it. We're very slow learners on shadows. Okay. So with forensic advances, and now this is at the same time, incidentally, the geometry of shadows is so Mobius of the Mobius strip. He worked it out perfectly while he was in a Russian prison, military. He was a prisoner of war. What are you going to do? Well, I'll work out the geometry of shadows, and he did it fine. And that is in your computer software when you're working things out. It's very well understood and understood for a long time. And so Henry Fried was able to show that actually those shadows are fine. Published an article and subsequent articles verifying other aspects of the photograph. So It's not a faked photograph. But you got to study it. So what's interesting here is that you've got something pretty. Shadows are very counterintuitive. So they're excellent for authenticating things. People have trouble faking them. And so this means that the general problem you have about the appearance-reality distinction starts getting solved by being extremely attentive to these absences. Okay. All right, so shadows are a means of authenticating things. So they've been understood a long time, Mobius. There is a strong distinction between experts and laymen and how good they are at them. I mean, you can learn how to do it. It actually helps quite a bit if you have a computer to work out the precise details of what that shadow should be doing. But you can, artists can learn how to do them properly, shadows. They can learn. They basically don't learn them because they won't make any difference if you have a drawn picture of something. People won't even notice. So why should you go through the effort of having accurate shadows? So if you look at these great artists and you look at their the shadows in the pictures, they're almost always wrong. And the artists know it, but it's not worth them doing it accurately. People will attend to the objects and not the shadows. When their shadows are moving, when it's movie time, on the other hand, people are much better at figuring out what the shadow should be doing. They're still not great. So they are getting good. They're watching a Star Wars movie, but they're not great. For example, there's the scenes where there's lightsabers. How do you make it realistic? There are shadows being cast by the lightsabers. There are beams of light, but it is true they look more realistic if you put a shadow beneath them. Okay. All right, so what I'm trying to, the gambit I got here is that the tampering of photographs is evidence in favor of absences being photographed. Because what we do when we have these doubts about whether it's been tampered, we start looking at the shadows. We think that though we are photographing absences of a particular sort, absences of light. So we have, so some shadows, they are fake. Some of them are real, but they're on both sides of the appearance-reality distinction. And so what I'm trying to do is to show that there literally are absences being photographed. And all I need is the ones that will be on the reality side of that distinction. Yeah, so Plato he kind of used shadows as emblematic of mere appearances. That's quite misleading because actually we do draw an appearance-reality distinction within the realm of shadows. Okay, so we have here a kind of a great chain of being. We have of non-being, I should say. And at the bottom, we've got like simple kinds of absences. And then we have the links that get higher and higher, and they start to lead up to one of my hobbies. So I'm not a professional photographer, but I do take photographs as a tourist because I am an absence tourist. I go, people often go to places to see what's there. I'm going there to see what's not there. And so I will tax the patience of some of my hosts by trying to have them take. So here's one sort of thing. But I'm not alone, and you don't have to be a philosopher or something. People are taking a photograph of a crack. A crack is a certain kind of thin hole. It's a tourist attraction. This was a natural one. There are people, you can go to museums and see interesting cracks that are put there deliberately. You can see holes. There are these kind of negative sculptures, and it is just a big hole in the ground. It's a little dangerous, these exhibits, because you could walk right. There's there's nothing preventing you from falling right in. If you look at them at first, you think it's something on the ground is black and two-dimensional, but no, it's a big drop. It's like a cube or something. All right. This is a big, just a sinkhole. Toronto has some, but not this big. And that is just huge, that hole. People came, they take photographs, it's a big deal. What are they taking photographs of? It's a hole. You have to, it's not there's a shadow in the hole, but there's a hole. Photogenic. Okay. Here's something. So when I was in Australia, they knew of my interest, and they said, well, we'll have to take you out and look at the largest absence that there is. And this is a negative constellation. So we in the northern hemisphere, we look at the Big Dipper, where there are actual stars and so on, where there's a presence of stars. That's a positive constellation. This is a negative constellation, which is there's an absence of stars, and it has the shape of an emu. That's the so that was their gift to Sorensen. Take the so you're it's a very large absence. What other absences can you see? I think that if you're wondering why do people bother with the Mona Lisa, I certainly have. Look, I've been there. I don't get it. It's a nice portrait, but there's so much more stuff that's just right around it that actually seems to be superior, and yet you have this mosh pit of people all teaming up to competing to see this thing. Well, it goes back to it being stolen in 1911. It wasn't that big a deal back then either. But when it got stolen, it's extremely embarrassing to the museum. It was still a significant Da Vinci. And so often the museums don't just report that subjects are stolen because they don't want to draw attention to their poor security. But they had to admit, yeah, they lost this one. And it's interesting, what happened is that it was stolen, but no one noticed its absence, including the guard. So the guard was suspected of being involved in it. It was only when someone came in 24 hours later to make a copy of it that they noticed the difference. And then they spent a long time. They said, well, maybe it's being photographed or something like that. It took them a while to see that there was an absence of it. It is actually rather common that people don't pick up on. You tend to perceive things, you kind of grandfather things in, and then you just assume the scene is the same. And so you can take away things, and it'll be a while before people pick up that it's gone. So they do pick up on it's gone, and then it's a scandal. And so what they do is they close the museum down. They look, they admit it, and then they open the museum. And then there is enormous crowds to go see the absence of the Mona Lisa. All kinds of people show up, including Max Brod and Kafka. There's plenty of time for foreign tourists to come in too and take a look. It's a sensation. And so everybody takes to look, they go, it's like you might think, well, maybe I can see the absence of the Mona Lisa. I just stay in my hotel room. Yeah. No, you have to go out. And then they would have maybe you're pretty short and it's hard to see it, You want to get into the right viewing position and so forth. That's what people did. I've done the same thing, incidentally, as I'm trying to, when I'm going, so the people who I'm with don't have the same enthusiasm. They say, well, I can, we're in the bar, I can see the absence of the statue in the bar. Well, I don't think you can. I think you got to go out and take a look. And then, so we have to spend a whole afternoon at it. Okay. All right, so what I have here is just a summary of what I've argued for. I'm maintaining that absences are normally, literally, and easily photographed. And the explanation is that the absences have effects on photographic surfaces. it's physical. The traces are recorded by cameras. They will be recorded whether someone believes that there are absences or not. If John Paul Sartre is taking, it doesn't matter. The shadows are going to show up in these absences. So surprising absences will be showing up in his photographs. Haven't been able to get any photographs of Sartre. I've got plenty of Sartre, but not his photographs. Him taking photographs. And so the idea is that the same is going to apply for complex absences. And that is the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Sorensen. A really provocative talk for us today. In fact, we're going to share the. Well,
oh, maybe you should. That's right.
So
yeah.
You don't need it.
Okay, you do. Yes.
So what I realized, though, is that today's U.S. Thanksgiving for you, and so there may be an absence at a table somewhere, and we appreciate that you come to join us here for this talk, given that. Hopefully you can engage in shopping and other things on Friday when you get back.
This is my holiday from holidays.
Oh, it is.
Because I'm a workaholic, and this is just so great. Canada's a real opportunity for me.
Terrific. And no snow, so there's an absence of snow.
There we go. So many absences to be thankful for. Yes.
Wonderful. So we have some time for questions, comments, and I'm just going to moderate. As Allison mentioned, I'm Professor Clark, one of the senior fellows here at JHI, and so it's really a pleasure to moderate and help us to think through some of your arguments. And I was thinking it would be useful to put up your argument, the summary of which, because I suspect that there are some disagreements there about the assertion about positionality, even that these traces are recorded by cameras regardless of beliefs and desires of the photograph or photographer, which is something that we spoke about earlier, to what extent it matters who the person is and what the world or the cosmology is through which one comes to see. So, and I'll return to that in a little while, I think. But I wanted to open it up for questions, comments, and if you just raise your hand, I'll just point you out and you can go ahead. And then we'll take them one by one initially. If there are a lot of questions, we'll group them and you can respond accordingly. So we have one at the back, so I'll take the question at the back initially. Yep.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I just had a question about the claim that absences have effects on photographic surfaces. It seems like in the Mona Lisa case, a photo like the one you showed after the theft is qualitatively identical to a photo taken, say, before the painting was ever put up. But we might want to say that in one, the absence is there, and in the other, it's not. I mean, before the Mona Lisa was ever even there, is there an absence of the Mona Lisa? It seems wrong to say that as much as it is to say there's an absence of any other particular painting. But, of course, the only difference between the two cases is that after the painting is stolen, we have an expectation. So again, it kind of, I don't know, it seems like Seth has a nice explanation of what's going on here, but I'm not sure exactly what you would say about that.
It's a kind of normative thing that it ought to be there. So if someone had taken a photograph before anybody had noticed, and they weren't trying to take a photograph of the absence of the Mona Lisa, that's what they would have taken a photograph of. So if the guard was just making photographs of something else, and then they start looking at it, my God, it's gone, and we have evidence for it. So that's before anybody recognizes it's gone. You look at the photograph retrospectively, and you see it is a photograph of the absence of the Mona Lisa.
Sorry, which photograph is the absence?
Well, they could have done, so the one in which, so let's see, like that one.
Right.
So that's how it was for 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
If someone had taken, now this particular photograph was taken well after by a reporter, but the scene, so a bit more of the history, what they had to do is that after being excoriated for a couple weeks, the museum said, well, okay, we're sorry, but we're done. And then they scrambled the order of the paintings that are around it, the canonical order, And so the idea was to get rid of the absence, so there's nothing to go see. So the idea is that it wasn't that it didn't wait upon someone saying, aha! What you did is that you had a photograph that already had the absence there, and you're discovering what's in the photograph, but was already there and was in that room for 24 hours. That's the picture. When I'm saying that some of them don't, so there can be some photographs in which there is a contribution, a social contribution, so some of them are like purely objective, doesn't matter, and others there's a social contribution. So I think in the case of the Mona Lisa, where you have these collectives, these Parisians, that's something that's highly social, complex, and there may well be contributions, and plausibly contributions from them. So some of them, if there were no people, there would not be this absence. But it doesn't wait upon them recognizing it as absent.
Okay, there was another, yeah.
Thanks for this interesting info. So my question is about metaphysics. So if we ontologically commit to absence, this question is kind of follow up. So how do we individuate the absence? So how do we know that this is the absence of Mona Lisa rather than the absence of other paintings or other things? So I'm wondering, how do we individuate the absence of particular things?
In this case, we're dependent on this previously undisturbed order of the paintings. I think that helps. I don't know the full account of how we do it. You're certainly right that if you don't have much background, you can't, things are just photographically, you're not going to, it won't leap out of the photograph to someone who's uninitiated. So the example I like quite a bit, and I repeat quite a bit, is maybe you have your bicycle stolen, and then you see the absence of the bicycle, and you're seeing the absence of the bicycle. If you photograph it, you can photograph the absence of the bicycle, but other people look at the photograph, they can't see it. So you're in a privileged position there, and it looks like and then you have to explain what it, that there is the absence. So how do we do it? I'm not exactly sure. How do I recognize that something is one chair rather than the other? It can be difficult. I think here you are kind of dependent on the history of what's going on and how the other objects around it are arranged.
Okay, great. We have a question here.
What I wanted to remind you of the joke about Lenin in Poland. Are you familiar with that joke?
I do not know the joke about Lenin in Poland.
Soviet joke about which the famous artist was asked to paint a painting of Lenin in Poland, and he insisted on doing it in great secrecy. And he unveiled it with the painting, and when he unveiled it, it was a picture of Krupskaya, Lenin's wife, naked in bed with Trotsky. And it was a great outrage. And he said, "This is an outrage. Where's Lenin?" Lenin said, "The artist is in Poland."
Comment on that absence?
I think I will not comment on that absence.
Do you want to follow it up, or?
No.
Okay, that's a great provocation. Yeah.
I want to make that joke work, but I don't know how to make it work with yes. But it's a good joke. Yes, I think
Anyone
it is.
else? Yeah. There was right here.
I wanted to ask about the difference you make between the absence of representation and the representation of an absence, especially given that shadows in and of themselves are a reaction to the light sensitivity of the camera, much like traffic at the time was whether it's pictured was a reaction to the speed sensitivity of the camera. So what's the difference?
if there's just no representation going on, that would be the example of an absence of representation. And then so what I was pointing out, that's because of the cameras at the time having very slow exposure, they have surprisingly different sensitivity than a contemporary medium. So what can be represented in the picture depends on what the sensitivity of it is. So the sensitivity is something where you kind of assess by looking at counterfactuals. Like if there were something there, it would show up. And the sensitivity brings that aspect out of it. So when you take a photograph of, suppose I want to take a photograph of take the photographs of the absence of the Twin Towers. You couldn't take those photographs in Boston. There was an absence of representation of the Twin Towers there because the photographs are not of New York, right? But it isn't a representation of the absence of the Twin Towers.
So you're making a distinction between the shadows that exist in reality and the shadows that are created by the camera. In the sense of the camera will create shadows because sometimes it just doesn't register that there's a shrub there. So the shrub is there in the shadows.
Yes, and even contemporary. So if you look at, you're trying to, so you're in a plane waiting and you're bored. So you take and the propellers. It's an old-fashioned plane with propellers, and you take a photograph of the absence that's cast by the propellers. Well, you can take that photograph. Then they start spinning, and given like pre-digital cameras, what will happen is that the shadow appears to have disappeared. Because the camera is not sensitive to the very rapidly moving shadow, and so you have there you have an example of it. It wasn't that the photograph is representing an absence of a shadow for the propeller because it's not sensitive to that. Although it can be misleading to look that way. I'm saying how it looks to you and how you're not seeing the shadow really disappear. It's just that it's now gone beyond your visual system. Similarly, of the cameras back then, unless it was a high-speed thing. What is going to be what absences you can represent depend on the sensitivity of the media, but the shadows are just there. You're not creating them. So when you take a photograph of a shadow and you're looking at the shadow, it's the same shadow. I also think if your dog is looking at the shadow, you're looking at the same shadow. The dog can pick that up. So it's just a common visual object available to many perceivers. And that's like what you presuppose. You're looking, you say, well, look at that shadow. It's the same shadow you're looking at.
Do you want to comment?
Yeah.
Right here, and then
So I think this follows on that question. And so with the Louvre Museum that you said this is not an absence of representation, it's a representation of absence. Did I get that right when you put that photograph first?
Which is the boulevard?
Yeah.
Yeah, I took that so I was denying that the photograph represented an absence of traffic. It's an absence of representation of traffic.
An absence of, okay. So it is a representation of absence?
No, it isn't. It is not.
Okay.
So when so in the photograph there's a representation. So if you look at the holes or something in the windows, that's representing an absence of building material because we made a hole instead. That's a representation because it is sensitive to that.
Because
yeah.
I think with that photograph, it was taken at a particular time of day to not capture any traffic, and there happened to be that one person at the water pump, right? Because it's also a photograph with an absence of blur. And I wanted to ask you about blur.
Okay.
Because I was thinking about blur from that photograph onward and thinking how it played into your talk. And I was thinking about distortion and the kinds of distortions that happen in photography.
Yes.
And then you got to that really fascinating photo of the erasure of Goebbels.
Ah.
And I wish that erasure of Goebbels were an actual erasure of Goebbels,
Ah.
but it's not, right? It's just
Yeah.
taken out of that photograph.
Yes.
Looking at the photograph, and it wasn't up very long, but I was looking at where Goebbels had been.
Yeah.
That for a fun. And it looks convincing. The problem is there was a really detailed background in that, and so there's grass with flowers, and it's a bit blurred, where it's too difficult to touch it up so that it looks
Yeah.
like real flowers, and so there's a blur on the grass.
Ah.
You can see Goebbels, in being removed, left this blur. And so I was thinking about blur. Does blur represent a kind of category in this epistemology that's in between absence and presence for you? Or is blur something you think about as distortion?
Yeah, it's distortion. I just take it that it's a weakness of the representation. So I'm losing. Yeah, I'm looking at. I'm not. There's no blur out there. It is just there's a loss of sensitivity, or there's something that's going wrong with my representation, and so I'm losing resolution.
And when does it go wrong? That's
the way you would measure it by looking at if-then statements, or if something had been there, it would have been represented. If it would not, if something had not been there, then it would not be represented. You want both those counterfactuals to be working very nicely together, and tracking what's going on. So representation is kind of tracking reality, and with blur, you start to lose the tracking, and it becomes less is reliably showing up. And also you have the opposite problem is that stray stuff is starting to appear. I haven't studied the photograph that carefully, but I also suspect that they were a little sloppy in leaving in Goebbels' shadow, but I could not differentiate it from the blur point. It could be that it was just a sloppy bit of doctoring. It wasn't worth patching up. But that is often a telltale. They'll sloppily delete someone but leave their shadow. Yeah. I'll see if I can recover. Yeah, I didn't see if I can get that quickly enough. So that's where, so that's the relevant one. So,
computationally expensive, as it were, to
yeah.
render this.
So we have there's Goebbels, and I was interested in this part right here. I thought, well, maybe that's his shadow, or so I thought, but I wasn't. Well, sorry. So is that part of his shadow, or this part of the shadow? I wasn't quite sure, but maybe it's just, sloppiness in how he's filling with the dark room. I can't tell.
One over here, and then we'll turn to.
Can I follow up?
Okay.
Yeah.
Technically, in a dark room, how is Goebbels removed?
I don't know. It has been described to me. It was actually surprisingly early during Mumbler. He went to trial, and many photographers who were taken in were cross-examined. And well, how did Mumbler do it? They actually could not reconstruct. They had several ways one could do it, and it was so they had. Sometimes you would. Well, some of the Mumbler things are a little bit. He would just have photographs of people that had been in that gallery, and he would just superimpose them, and then it would be awkward because people would show up, and well, that person's still alive, and then it would be embarrassing. You'd have to do something about that.
But this is pretty convincing. It's very convincing.
Yeah, it's somewhat. Yeah.
White.
The people are, it does seem a little bit of an odd human stance to have that much distance, but I think I'd probably want a little distance between me and Hitler as well. But yeah, so normally it's not like, you try to get yourself photographed with the big shot all the time, and he was like, and so it must have been a pretty worrisome. Goebbels projected himself as a great family man, and so he didn't like this rumor. So he would have approved of his own removal. Yeah, so I don't know. So there are actually a whole bunch of techniques that they were available and known in 1870. And now there's so much more known about how to do it. And that's what leads us to be pretty quickly suspicious. We've far outstripped them.
Back there.
Thank you. This is really fantastic. I have a question for how do you factor in the material forces of the cameras that are taking these absences? Because I think of the contrast between original daguerreotype versus a contemporary DSLR. The shadows that they can capture very different. And so I know that you said maybe a dog sees the same shadows as a human, but I guess I'm wondering when cameras capture different shadows, forms, do you still consider it the same shadow or is it different absences?
Yeah, I think it's the same shadow. And I actually just using my my phone. So when I did take a whole bunch of amateurs for a book I needed, and it quickly became apparent that I could manipulate to bring out a better resolution of the shadow. And sometimes I seem to have lost the shadow and so forth, and you'd fiddle with things, and then you could bring it out. So I'm taking that as just is the same shadow, but there's just different resolutions and light contrast, and it's different representations of the same shadow.
In that case, does the shadow exist regardless of what's captured in it?
Yes.
Does it exist regardless of how much light is in it?
Oh, well, it's sensitive to the light. So what it is, so it's a bit of a parasite this way. What it requires is there's got to be this contrast with the surrounding light. You need a certain kind of light distribution, and so it needs that. There's this other question about whether you can have. You always need contrast for representing these absences. I deny that. I think that when you go on a cave tour and they turn off the lights and it's just very dark, it's surrounding dark, I think you're seeing the darkness, the absence of light, but there is no contrast. And so it looks like Sartre is mistaken. He thought it was always, you had to see the absence as a figure in a ground, a gestalt kind of point. But I think once you're into a cave and you see like total darkness, and you are seeing it because your blind companion, they miss out. They don't know what it's. So it's another example is silence. So you can hear some silences contrastively, as in music, and in speech. So I'm exploiting them all the time in speech. They're important. Certainly in writing, they're conventionalized. So we have all these blanks. Well, they're not silences, but they're kind of the counterparts of exaggerated word segmentation. So I'm there saying, here's this world. It's got loaded up with absences, and then we have different ways we represent them. We can represent them perceptually, and that's good. But can we improve on that? Yeah, we can take out our cameras, and depending on how the abilities of the camera and the sensitivity of that camera, we can pick more of them up and have many surprises. So with high-speed cameras, now I can start to see the shadow of the propeller move around. Incidentally, with your ordinary cameras we have now, you get something weirder happening, and it's a very surreal sort of vision where you appear to have the helicopter blades bend and they rotate the wrong way.
Rolling shutters.
Yeah, rolling shutters. Thank you. And that's an interesting question. Is that an illusion, or is that just the camera performing as it should?
Yes.
Okay.
I was going to make a comment just following up on the question about individuating absence. But the point you just made now about contrast, like not being a certain perception might complicate this a bit. I was wondering, does individuating absence in the way that the gentleman over there said, does it necessitate maybe reading around the contours of the paratext, right? Like reading around some of which is a social context, but some of which can be captured in the book reference. And so on the picture the little taps on the walls that are supposed to be holding something, but they're not. So that in itself is what is shaping. That's a paratext that's like shaping the perception of an absence in that situation. Or if you're looking and perceiving a hole in the street or a side of the building, you're reading sort of the contours in sense of the edges of what is there, the road that is kind of broken apart. Does that, or the wall that's left behind, whether or not there's a shadow in the actual hole. I was wondering if that sort of gets at the way forward in terms of individuating absence without needing sort of the background story of the theft of the Mona Lisa, for instance, but just looking at the picture and being able to see the absence without based solely on the paratext that is already captured.
Yeah, I think you're right. For saying most of these things, you do need to have a bunch of infrastructure there, where you can kind of build up this idea that it ought to be there. So it's not a moral ought. It's but it's a yeah. So I think I am sympathetic. You have somewhere appropriate for a painting to be. Indeed, that's where it had been hung. Right? But maybe this also would illustrate, when this happened incidentally, there was controversy as to whether this was the absence of the Mona Lisa people were seeing, because there was a rumor that it was a fake, that what happened was the museum had put a fake Mona Lisa in there, and that what it was actually stolen was a fake Mona Lisa. And there's quite a bit of speculation along that line. It was taken somewhat seriously because these museums get embarrassed and they'll do desperate things to avoid embarrassment. If it had been true, now it was the original Mona Lisa that was stolen, but had it been, suppose it was instead just a copy that was there, then the right answer would be that they were right. It was what you were seeing. You thought you were seeing the absence of the Mona Lisa. You were merely seeing the absence of a copy of the Mona Lisa, and that's not worth the trip in the same way, So it's so I think this is kind of illustrating how objective it is. So it's partly you got to kind of the history of it is kind of important here and so forth. So often you don't know it. They didn't know. The Parisians weren't sure because they were. What is going on with this? Most of them do think it was the absence of the Mona Lisa rather than the copy.
Okay, so we have a question, comment?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. I was just wondering how you see, or if you see a relationship between nothing and absence. Like, is nothing the ontological variation of absence, or are they just two distinct categories?
So nothing is a real tricky word, and so if I'm teaching a logic class, I say, oh, I'm all fine. It's a universal quantifier, and I don't think that really exhausts all our usage of nothing. I'm not sure what an absence is. So here's my attitude toward absence. It's the same as my attitude toward time and toward possibility. I think I have a pretty good grasp of time, but then you start asking me questions about it, and then I start to become rubbery, and I fall into inconsistencies. Simile mode, I think what's possible, that someone might walk in, someone might walk out. There's pretty comfortable. You press me, and what happens is I become. I'm not sure now about what. Maybe all there is just what's actual, but yeah. So I'm a little, and my attitude toward absence is that it's like time and possibility. You can talk about nothingness, but I don't think that helps that much in explaining what's going on. Much better is to talk about absence concretely, an absence of something, an absence of light, an absence of the Mona Lisa. You study those patterns, and you see, you kind of expose our kind of intuitive feel for it, or kind of the kind of underlying grammar of how we're using it, and then you try to understand that part. And then you're understanding absence a lot better than if you just sort of think about, like, if you got too wrapped up in realms of non-being and so on, you make it too abstract, you get kind of intellectual hypoxia. You kind of just wind up getting overconfident about what you're saying, and then you got to start saying silly things.
Okay, so we only have about 5 minutes or so. There are 3 outstanding questions. I don't know if there are any others. So I'm going to take all 3 and allow you to respond to all 3. So one here, and then here, and
Thank you. To your point about the idea that the absences are recorded by the photograph regardless of the beliefs and the desires of the photographer, I was very intrigued by Dr. Clark's mention in the beginning about the impact of the positionality of the photographer, and just wondering that, like, if we're thinking that these the absences are recorded regardless, thinking about the importance of interpretation and how that idea of the expectation of the absence, how that's connected to interpretation, and how people, different people might have a different expectation or understanding of the absence depending on their positionality. And particularly, Dr. Clark, was curious to hear your thoughts. I don't know if that's possible, but just given your work on justice and visibility, to hear your thoughts on that.
okay, we'll go to this question.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. So I was really curious as to what your approach to photographic research is. Are you a transparency theorist? Are you a depictive theorist? Because if you are the latter, then it slightly complicates your position on absences. You would have to have a story for what it is to be absent from the surface and what it is to be absent from the content of the photograph.
Right. Yeah, I reject the transparency thesis. I'm not as, and I'm not sure. It depends on how we talk about depictionism. But I don't think I see right through the photograph. It's interesting, a thought. I think that a better account is actually by Scott Walton. It's an objectivist account. And Walton, incidentally, is a professional photographer who disagrees with me on many of these issues, incidentally. And so, yeah, that's the quick answer to that.
So there's, I don't know if you want to respond to this question,
Oh,
and then we'll take the last
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry. I thought you were for me. I got a little distracted. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, I think that in order to recognize the absences, you need certain kinds of beliefs and expectations. But the absences are there. So when you're showing the sad photograph of your missing bike, that's not, then other people, they don't see the absent bicycle. You do. So you're in a better position to interpret it, and you're seeing it, and they're not seeing it. So, but nevertheless, the photograph is representing it, and you have evidence of it this way. So it's at the level of the epistemology of the photograph. The metaphysics of the photograph doesn't depend on your expectations.
Yeah, and I guess one of the reasons Allison asked me to moderate is that we have a disagreement on that point. So I think we'll continue to take that up over dinner.
Okay.
So that I don't say anything else to disagree. But
I just want to make some random comments about absence, and then I can ask a question about cigarettes. So I used to have a cat when I really ride, and the cat always sat on the rug. So after the cat died, I almost couldn't look at this rug anymore because all I could see was the cat on the rug. So if I took a picture of the rug, well, the rug, but to me, there was a cat there, so that was the absence of the cat. And I have pictures of the cat on the rug, and it's not sure that there's cat is not there. I have present in one picture and absent in another one, but it's, or maybe you say it's representation.
It's a representation of the absence. Actually, I'm sympathetic with your take. It is a photograph of the absence of the cat. Yeah. There's a picture there. It's like the bike case, I think. Right. Other people can't see it, but there's no reason why you're in a privileged position to be able to interpret the photograph.
And obviously, the one inside is a very famous case, and you see maybe the dirt left behind or something to show that something was even there, or in the case of the cat. After the vacuum, there isn't any cat there. So one of my comments about absence of
something.
Yeah.
And then this is separate. You mentioned about something about similarity. You said it's the back of an object.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about things that are back to it. So if you're taking a picture of someone, standing by a seashore and then the sun's coming behind that person is facing you, like black. So like you're actually looking at the front, it's not the back. So I'm not too sure if I misunderstood what you said.
You're looking at the back. So there's a controversial thesis. So I'm claiming you're seeing the back of the object, the back of the person, rather than seeing the front. So right now I'm dressed in black appropriately for this. And here, there's still a fair amount of light that is being bounced off of me. You see the front of me. But if it was illuminating back, then it wouldn't matter what I had in the front. You wouldn't be able to see it. The front part of me would no longer be optically relevant. What would be is just, you could have carved me out and make it like it was a Hollywood facade, so I was just, I would look the same. Indeed, in Hollywood, you do that. All you need is the shells of things, and it will look the same in a silhouetted situation. Similarly, you can make this just the shells of the in frontlit circumstances. They do that in Hollywood as well, where it just looks like it's a building or something like that. So what's the relevant part of an object is its surface. And the point is that in frontlit circumstances, the front of the object, the front surface, is what's relevant. In backlit circumstances, only the back of the object is relevant. And you don't need most of the object. So you don't need most of me. You only need this like thin layer, which the absorption layer, enough to block the light. So it's a spookier picture. It's spookier. So you're seeing. And so it's controversial because some people think, you mean I've got like X-ray vision? I see right through the person, and then I have to explain more details.
So like you say, it could be a cardboard cutout.
Exactly. Yes, and that is indeed how it's done often, and that's all you need is just something that's very thin.
Well, I can't think of a better way to provoke us, of course, as fellows, and many of our fellows here in thinking about absence in this way. So please join me in thanking Professor Sorensen.